11th Biennial Corporate Governance Conference, organized by the Hong Kong Institute of Chartered Secretaries, focused on changes in corporate governance practices in the current business and social environment. In the following presentation, the first speaker, the Honourable Mr James Lau, JP, the Hong Kong SAR Government Secretary for Financial Services and the Treasury, talks about the corporate governance challenges associated with innovative sectors in the new economy, and he explains the steps being taken to help Hong Kong develop into a regional hub for green finance.
Now, let me share briefly with you a few thoughts on the issues and challenges arising from two global trends. First, there are the challenges for corporate governance associated with emerging and innovative sectors in the new economy. The second relates to green investing, as many corporates embrace ESG standards in their business. To begin with, one of the major reforms I've been involved with in my tenure as Secretary has been the new listing regime for emerging and innovative companies. This came into effect on 30th of April this year, permitting new economy firms with a weighted voting rights structure to list on the main board of the Stock Exchange of Hong Kong. Aside from the elevated requirements for market capitalization and revenue, the company must also be an innovative company and demonstrate a track record of high business growth. One of the main arguments in support of the WVR structure is that the enhanced voting rights given to companies' founders allow them to focus more on long-term performance and less on short-term market pressures. They also allow the founders to maintain control over the strategic direction of the company and prevent unwanted takeover attempts. There are, however, concerns that there could be abuse of the voting powers of those shareholders with WVR. It is therefore necessary to put in place safeguards to address these concerns. In fact, Hong Kong is the first jurisdiction to have a full-fledged regulatory regime governing the listing of WVR companies, or in some places they call them dual-class shares, and we have a comprehensive package of safeguards for the investing public. And I'll just briefly outline them for you. The first safeguard we have put in place is a ring fencing to permit only new applicants to list with a WVR structure. After listing, issuers with WVR structure will be prohibited from increasing the proportion of WVR shares in issue. Secondly, an issuer with a WVR structure must establish a corporate governance committee that comprises only independent non-executive directors. This committee will review and monitor potential conflict of interest between the issuer, its subsidiary, or shareholders, and also the conflict of interest between them and any beneficiary of weighted voting rights on the other. The Board of Directors needs to consider the recommendations of the Corporate Governance Committee fully, and they need to comply or they will have to explain. Thirdly, enhanced disclosure. WVR stock counters must have a name suffixed with the marker W. There must also be disclosure and health warning on the front page of all listing documents, periodic financial statements, circulars, notifications, and announcements. Fourthly, protection of non-WVR shareholders' rights to vote. Non-WVR shareholders must be able to convene an extraordinary general meeting and add resolutions to the agenda. The minimum stake required to do so must be no higher than 10% of the voting rights on a one share, one vote basis. Fifthly, a number of key matters must be decided on a one share, one vote basis, and they include changes to the listed entities' constitutional documents, variation of the rights attached to any class of shares, the appointment or removal of independent non-executive directors, the appointment or removal of auditors, and the voluntary winding up of the company. Sixthly, WVR beneficiary must be an individual who has an active executive role within the business and is contributing to a material extent to the growth of the business. WVR beneficiaries must be directors of the issuer at listing, and also they have to remain as directors afterwards. Seventhly, any class of shares conferring WVRs must not entitle the beneficiary to more than 10 times the voting power of ordinary shares. Lastly, we have built in event-based sunset clauses. The WVR rights attached to a beneficiary's shares will cease upon transfer of the beneficial ownership of those shares or the control over the voting rights attached to them. Such rights will also lapse permanently if a beneficiary dies, ceases to be a director, or is deemed by the stock exchange to be incapacitated or no longer meet the requirements of a director as set out in the listing rules. Among the above safeguards, a question has been raised as to whether WVR beneficiaries can be corporate entities. This is a complex subject, raising governance issues such as whether this would mean perpetual WVR rights. Should there be further restrictions on the exercise of corporate WVR rights? Should there be further sunset clause arrangements or other ring-fencing measures? Now, all these are important issues that are currently under in-depth examination. If it is decided that changes on this front need to be pursued, there will be public consultation to ensure proper safeguards to protect the balance of rights among the stakeholders. Now, let me turn to my second topic. There's an encouraging trend for more corporates to follow the UN principles of responsible investing, and they commit to ESG reporting and also ESG investing. Now, ESG, of course, encompasses a wide range of important issues, including carbon footprint reduction, tackling climate change, sustainable investing, impact investing, and so forth. Now, where there are some that tend to downplay the importance of combating global climate change, many scientists, government officials, civic groups, and corporates think that it is important to do their part in protecting our environment. Corporates are becoming more and more conscious of their carbon footprint and impact on the environment. This is taking place alongside developments in the investment community, where ESG investing is gaining traction in mainstream financial markets. Our government is committed to developing Hong Kong into a sustainable city and combating global climate change. Given my portfolio as Secretary for Financial Services and the Treasury, I'd like to focus now on green investing and how Hong Kong's capital markets can be a fundraising platform for green projects. We are committed to developing Hong Kong into a regional hub for green finance. To facilitate green debt issuance in Hong Kong and elsewhere, our Hong Kong Quality Assurance Agency launched in January this year their Green Finance Certification Scheme, which provides third-party conformity assessments for green debt instruments. The HKQAA developed a scheme with reference to a number of international and national standards on green finance. Two types of certification are available: pre-issuance and post-issuance certification. From a broader perspective, the enhanced transparency and accreditation standard of green financial products would help to strengthen market confidence in green finance and avoid greenwashing. According to reports issued by the Climate Bonds Initiative and China's Central Depository and Clearing Company Limited, China's green bond issuance was $36.2 billion in 2016, accounting for 39% of the global total. Now, that figure comprised $23.6 billion that are aligned with international definitions and the rest aligned with China's green definitions. For 2017, China's total green bond issuance was $37.1 billion, of which $22.9 billion are aligned with international definitions. And China was the largest global green bond issuer in 2016 and the second largest in 2017. I'm pleased to note that we are seeing good momentum for Hong Kong to develop as a green finance hub, notably with the Financial Secretary announcing in February this year the coming launch of a government green bond program with a borrowing ceiling of 100 billion Hong Kong dollars. In fact, in the first half of this year, we already saw at least 15 green bond issuances in Hong Kong, with an aggregate size reaching $8 billion. The issuers of these green bonds included the like of World Bank and the European Investment Bank, and also corporations from Hong Kong, mainland, and beyond. This attests to the strengths of Hong Kong as a major green finance hub in the region. In June this year, we also announced the launch of our Green Bond Grant Scheme, which reimburses up to $800,000 per eligible green bond issue the issuance expenses incurred to obtain certification from the HKQAA's Green Finance Certification Scheme. Ladies and gentlemen, we are currently seeing an unstoppable wave of innovation and technology, as well as an increased recognition of the importance of environmental, social, and governance standards. The new economy and green economy raise fresh issues and challenges for corporate governance. I've shared with you some of our experience in Hong Kong and hope we can benefit from your insightful deliberation. And I wish you all a very successful conference today. Thank you very much.
The second speaker, Professor Mervyn King, Chairman of the International Integrated Reporting Council, discusses new challenges, opportunities, and thinking in today's corporations. He explains how companies can become more environmentally, socially, and financially responsible in response to higher stakeholder expectations.
In order to put this into context about new challenges, opportunities, and thinking, I want to take you back to the 17th and 18th century, when there were organizations which had no limit on liability. And it was wealthy families who provided the risk capital to start businesses. But they were also liable for the claims of all the creditors and all the employees. And they started balking against this. But politicians, which sounds very familiar, they wanted to create more jobs. And so the thought was, by politicians, we will create an artificial person with limited liability. At the time, the theologians were very opposed to this. They said, who is mankind to create a person? Only Almighty God can create a person. And one of the famous theologians at the time, Lord Thurlow, in 1844, said, who are we to create a person that has no body to be kicked, no soul to be damned, and has no conscience? The theologian was correct. When you get a company registered today, you get a certificate. It does nothing. It certainly has no conscience. A company becomes a conscious one because of the consciousness of its corporate leaders. Its corporate leaders are the heart, mind, and soul of this incapacitated, artificial person. So the social, political pressures built up, and by 1844, an act was passed creating the limited liability company. But it was an absolutely incapacitated person, the same as a young person in the middle of the 19th century, injured in some manner, became incapacitated of mind. By the end of the 19th century, the duties, legal duties of a curator of an incapacitated person was well developed. And that was that the curator had to act in the best interest of this incapacitated human being, take great care in his decision-making, take great care of that person's assets. Whatever skills he had, he would apply in the best interest of this incapacitated person, and would be diligent in planning for that person, both short, medium, and long term. Let's assume the physician specialist said, well, this person could live well into his 90s. There were consequences that wealthy families provided this, what became known then as equity capital, because many of the members of those families also became the directors. It was almost a natural consequence that, for example, the other stakeholder, the employee, saw them as the owners of the company. And they had started finding primacy of place amongst other stakeholders. So much so, if we move into the 20th century, Henry Ford, at the Ford Motor Company Limited in 1919 made excessive profits, $65,000, probably $65 billion today. And he announced that he wanted to increase the wages of his employees to encourage them to work longer hours and weekends to meet the demand for his Model T Ford. The Dodge brothers, who were minority shareholders, said you cannot do that. The shareholder has primacy of place. This excessive profit you must declare as a special dividend. Henry Ford declined. The Dodge brothers, who eventually became a competitor, went to court. And believe it or not, the court declared, yes, the shareholder is the owner and has primacy of place. You must declare the excessive profit as a special dividend to the shareholder before you increase the wages of your employees. So you will see the societal change. Can you imagine any court today in any jurisdiction making such an order? But that persisted until the appeals were finalized in 1922. And ownership persisted. It was exacerbated by a gentleman called Milton Friedman, who in the 1970s wrote a dissertation in which, and I paraphrase, the sole purpose of the company is to make profit without deception. I add, at any cost, Mr. Friedman? Question mark. Well, it was at a cost, because through the 20th century, it was scientifically established by the end of the 20th century that we had a century of unsustainable development. Throughout the 20th century, we followed the dictate that the directors should operate according to the design of its owners, the shareholders. What Milton Friedman said, tacitly, was A, the company was not a part of society, and B, directors were mere puppets, dumb dolls of the shareholders. Now, could that be? Or right through the 20th century, didn't directors have a duty to act in the best interest of the company for the benefit of all its stakeholders? Or was it only the shareholders? And it's a very strange kind of ownership which developed. A shareholder has no duty or responsibility to a company, none whatsoever. A representative shareholder, such as a pension fund, owes its duties to its beneficiaries, but it owes no duty to the company in which it invests. And a shareholder has no right to the income of a company if the board declares a dividend, and if there's sufficient liquidity, a dividend is paid to shareholders. A shareholder cannot remove a pencil from a company. It's a theft. The shareholder cannot use the company's motor vehicles. It's an unlawful use. Strange kind of ownership. Well, not only that, shareholders have become transient. If I divide the room up into half, and we have an IPO here on the Hong Kong Stock Exchange, King Limited. This half of the room subscribes for shares. The subscription you pay goes into the coffers of the company. 6 months later, you sell your shares to this half of the room. Where does that money go? It goes into your pockets. Doesn't even go to the company. And yet in public discourse to this very day, these people are said to be the owners of the company. On a stock exchange today, with electronic transfer of ownership changes within 22 to 25 seconds. Have a look of the average ownership of shares in any company. It's hovering around 7 months, the average age. So our shareholder body has become transient. And the ownership myth has been debunked at great universities, Stanford, Oxford, etc. The era of corporate leaders. In 2016, I spent some time with my colleagues at Harvard University, Professor Eccles, Professor Payne. And Lynn Payne wrote a fantastic article in the Harvard Business Review of December 16 under the title, The Era of Corporate Leaders. The era of corporate leaders of the 20th century, she said, was to focus and believe that they had a duty to act in the best interest of the shareholders, when at all times they had a duty to act in the long-term health of the company, not the wealth of the shareholder. And as she pointed out, that if these corporate leaders got it right to get the health of the company correct long-term, this was in the long-term better interest of all its stakeholders, including the shareholders. And so, until the end of the 20th century, we had in automotive terms companies with rear-view mirrors and no windscreens. Very difficult to drive a motor car without a windscreen. But the only way we reported, believing we were discharging our duty of accountability, mea culpa, was to present a balance sheet, a profit and loss statement with related notes, management commentary. But IFRS, International Financial Reporting Standards in this part of the world, US GAAP in the United States of America, when there was a corporate failure or a financial event, complexity was added to complexity in these standards, and they became less and less comprehensible to the average user. Could one really discharge the duty of accountability by accounting in a manner which was incomprehensible to 999 people out of 1,000? And it was worse, because from the 1930s about we started reporting on financial issues. But going back before that date, go back to when our directors started in the 19th century, turning into the 20th century. If, for example, the business was the manufacture of a wardrobe with a secret drawer, we'll call it the King wardrobe, you'll see the manufacturing company would have had to get natural capital, wood, get forests deforested, plane it down into planks, human capital, wood with manufactured capital, plant and machinery, make the wardrobe, and you have intellectual capital, it's got a brand name, and you sell it out into society. And of course you need working capital, financial capital. What did we report on during the 20th century? The top two. Had the others disappeared? Of course not. We just stopped reporting about them. But the third industrial revolution, the 70s, the start of the computer age, resulted in the expedition of research. And scientifically it was established. But you have a look, 95 onwards, an extraordinary thing was shown by Ocean Toma and endorsed by McKinsey and other researchers, that for the first time on the great stock exchange of the world, including Hong Kong, the intangible assets were given greater value in the market cap of companies than the tangible assets, which were additives in a balance sheet, according to the standards established by IASB and the FASB. Well, what were these intangible assets? Those are they which you see on the screen. Suddenly, ecological shoot became a reality. We had used, during the 20th century, natural assets faster than nature had been regenerating them. And yet, this explosion of population, because of the advance of medical science in the 20th century, continued into the 21st century. So we had an increased demand for product, but a lower natural asset base. And it became clear to some of the world's great corporate leaders, like Paul Pullman of Unilever, who called a press conference in 2010 saying, "From now on, Unilever will carry on business as unusual." We cannot carry on as usual. If we do, we will last another 5 years and then we will collapse. And you can study yourself how he changed. So suddenly, those intangibles which you see on the screen became critical issues for asset owners and asset managers. And they started asking a different kind of question. Instead of asking, how much profit has the company made? They started asking the question, how did this company make this money? Did it make this money subsidized by society and the environment? Was this the free part of Milton Friedman's free economy, that we subsidized that bottom line profit? Well, it was. Well, at the beginning of the 21st century, many of you in this room will remember what we tried to do in order to communicate what was happening to our stakeholders. We developed balanced business reporting, balanced scorecards, John Elkington's triple bottom line. I persuaded him, no such thing. We report in the monetary bottom line, but companies do operate in the triple context of the economy, society, and the environment. And each was trying to communicate value. And so sustainability reporting was born. It was born out of the United Nations Environmental Programme, United Nations Community on Trade and Development, the Global Reporting Initiative in Boston, and then moved to Amsterdam, and I became the chairman of that, and I was chairman of the United Nations on Governance and Oversight. And an important thing happened at the United Nations in 2008. IFAC, the International Federation of Accountants, the GRI, UNCTAD, the world chairman of the Big Four, the World Bank, IAA, the Institute of Internal Auditors, some of the world's great asset owners and asset managers met under Chatham House rules. It was at that meeting that the president and the chief executive of IFAC, Ian Ball, said, it's become clear to IFAC and to accounting bodies around the world that financial reporting is critical, but it's no longer sufficient to discharge the duty of accountability. I was able to say, as chairman of the United Nations on Governance and Oversight and chairman of the Global Reporting Initiative, well, we are now trying to account for these intangible assets that have become so valuable. And we've developed sustainability reporting, but without numbers, it's quite meaningless. But I went further, and I said, you know, reporting in two silos, as companies were now doing, financial statements, sustainability reporting, according to GRI guidelines at that time, now standards, is actually divorced from reality. No company operates on that basis. These things are interconnected, integrated, 24/7, including the relationship between the company and its stakeholders. And the corporate toolbox used by the board right through the 20th century of financial capitalism on the basis that it would trickle down to the impoverished has failed. That trickling became treacle. It stuck. That we have to develop a new form of corporate thinking and corporate reporting. And I said, what we need to do is accept that these things are interconnected, integrated. And so started the philosophy of integrated thinking and integrated reporting. And there were drivers of that change: climate change, financial crises, ecological overshoot, radical transparency with social media. Civil society became a greater disruptor of businesses than shareholder activism. Stranded assets. You have a balance sheet with plant and machinery, but it's driven by fossil fuel. Well, in the next 5 years, that will become a stranded asset. Then, the World Federation of Stock Exchanges. 88% of member exchanges embrace ESG initiatives, including Hong Kong. 18 exchanges have planned incorporation of the climate change financial disclosures. And exchanges are now offering green or climate bonds. And from profit to value, we moved from 2008 at least, from this concept of increasing profit at any cost, and moved away from what we had been taught, that value is about the present value of discounted future cash flows. Value is a comparative between book value and market value, all through a financial lens. We started asking that critical question, what is this business model? How is the company making its money? And in doing so, what is the impact or effect on the three critical dimensions for sustainable development: the economy, society, and the environment? So value today is looked at through a value creation lens. In December last year, I was at the ICGN conference, 153 of the world's great asset owners and asset managers, and the word profit wasn't mentioned once. Arising out of all this, the International Integrated Reporting Council was formed at St. James's Palace, which was quite historic. And we worked for 2 years with some of the world's iconic companies and some of the world's great professionals. And we came up with the framework, which should be well known to all of you present. We said there's 6 capitals, 6 headings under which resources are used. Social capital includes the relationship between the company and stakeholders. We said there's a value creation process, and you'll see there it is. The resources and relationships go in to the business model, how the company makes its money. It has its output, its product, and then it has its outcomes because it goes out into society. And I think Coca-Cola is one of the great examples, great company, incorporating into its business strategy its social responsibility of conservation of water for the last 12 years. But 5 years ago, civil society in North America said the reason for the obesity of our children is Coca-Cola. And Coca-Cola reacted to that. For the first time, the board met in Atlanta, Georgia, and said, we're 123 years old, we've never really discussed the outcomes of our product. And here's an alleged outcome. And so they changed their strategy. And that's an extract from the New York Times, whole page. We will not market to children under 12. We will make sure there, at all our bottling plants, there are activities for children under 12. We will have nutritional labeling in all our cans and bottles, and we will develop a Coca-Cola without calories. And so they did, Coca-Cola Life. So there was new thinking. How does the company make its money? How will it sustain value creation in the time to come? And integrated thinking became the mantra of the day. I call it a symphony. It's a symphony between the resources used by the company in making its product or rendering its services and the relationships between the company and its stakeholders. So much so that some of the great companies today have a whole new corporate animal called the Corporate Stakeholder Relationship Officer. Her sole job is to have this ongoing relationship between the company and its stakeholders. So we've moved from share value to value creation. And there's my octopus, which shows that in the arms of the octopus is what we have to do, AFS, sustainability reporting. Whatever your business is, the regulator might want you to do something else. All that can be online. But the board has to spend more time just understanding those financial statements, understanding this massive information that's coming in through the net. We must not let knowledge get lost in that information. And then take up what is material defined in the IRC framework as that which is having an impact on those 3 critical dimensions. And that cartoon sort of says it all. You'll see the gentleman on the right of the screen. He's complying with the law, but he's looking a bit wobbly, isn't he? The gentleman on the left has even put on a bit of weight. He's looking quite comfortable because he's discovered that really to communicate to your stakeholders what you're doing with those 3 critical dimensions the user can make a much more informed assessment about value and can make a much more informed assessment about investment. And so the purview of internal auditors has increased enormously. In a survey of the chairman of audit committees, it has been shown they find the report from the internal auditor is much more informative than the external auditor, because the internal auditor is dealing with all these issues, sustainability issues, supply chain issues, strategy issues. And innovative technology is already operative in internal auditing techniques, blockchain, artificial intelligence, the Internet of Things. There are three major shifts in the world. We've moved from silo reporting to integrated reporting. We've moved away from short-term capital to inclusive capitalism. I was privileged to be president of Mansion House in London with Ratan Tata, Lynn Rothschild, Bill Clinton, and others. We formed the Coalition for Inclusive Capitalism to replace financial capitalism, which had clearly failed in our world. And inclusive capitalism is simply that you look at how an organization impacts on those three critical dimensions in sustainable capitalism. I quote Prue Bennett's boss there, BlackRock, looking for long-term value creation. CEOs should explicitly affirm that their boards have reviewed those plans. Well, that's one of the world's great asset owners. If you want to raise capital, that's what Prue will be looking at in this part of the world. So strategy is, there's a new challenge. You have to look from inputs to outcomes. You just can't stop at outputs. And all this is being driven by responsible investment. The great asset owners and asset managers have all signed up to the principles of responsible investment. They will not invest in a company which they believe is carrying on business in a manner which is adding to the challenges which we have on planet Earth. And plan A is to adopt this integrated approach. And we have to make it succeed because we don't have planet B, not around. So plan A for planet A, there's no planet B. So OUHK is supportive of this. The corporate toolbox, as I said, has to change, and it is changing around the world. We have changing times. You'll see on the screen there, nothing is what it used to be. How many times did I chair companies in London, Europe, and here? Tax policy was a backroom calculation according to regulation. Today, the board looks at tax policy. Will it be acceptable by our stakeholders? Or will there be a boycott of our stores, as happened to Starbucks in the United Kingdom? So we have new challenges, mindset changes, capitals and stakeholder relationships, responsible investments, and an outcomes-based approach to governance. We need to consider that we need a company-centric governance model. We need a model where we can say, what are the outcomes that we want to achieve by practicing good governance? And work backwards. That's what I did. And as chairman of the King Committee and chairman of the IRC, we said, what is it we're trying to achieve? And what we were trying to achieve was to be accountable in an understandable manner, hence integrated reporting. What we were trying to achieve in governance was a company that was seen as a responsible corporate citizen in the constrained world of the 20th century with increasing population. Last night, 1/4 of the people on planet Earth went to bed either hungry or without potable water. And yet by 2045, we're going to have another 2 billion people. If I'm the innkeeper of Planet N, last night I would have been entitled to put up a neon sign, no vacancies. Well, we cannot do that. So we've got to learn to make more with less. And quite clearly, if you think you can carry on business as usual and achieve that, well, welcome to the age of stupidity. Think about it. It has to change. So, new thinking. We did adopt new thinking. We said, let's see what are the outcomes that one needs for good governance, ethical culture and effective leadership, value creation in a sustainable manner, adequate and effective controls and informed oversight. Boards today have blind oversight over management's proposals. But if you have stakeholder relationships as one of your agenda items, you have a report at each board meeting, what is the ongoing relationship between the company and stakeholders? The board becomes informed about this. You have at each board meeting an agenda item, inputs to outcomes. You're aware of the impact, the effect that your product has on the society and the environment, etc. And you talk about it, and it becomes strategic. You've got to have IT governance and security, because cyber security has become a threat to all of us in our companies. So it's about quality. It's not about quantity. It's not this mindless tick box checklist approach we've had for governance over the years. We need to make it mindful. And when you have those outcomes, you keep asking yourself the question, if we do this, will it impact adversely on this outcome, or will it be positive? So Helen Keller, that famous blind woman, said, the only thing worse than being blind is having sight and no vision. What is it you all see? You see a resource-constrained world. You see a world where, if you carry on business as usual, we will fail. And you as corporate leaders owe a duty. And what is that duty? To make sure the long-term health of your companies, which is in the long-term better interests of everyone. So the vision must be to have a company-centric governance model which moves away from yesterday's primacy of the shareholder. It needs to be implemented mindfully to achieve the 4 outcomes of effective leadership: value creation in a sustainable manner, adequate controls, legitimacy of operations. Do you have to grope in the dark? No. You have the light before you. Read the IRC framework and glance at King 4. Thank you very much for listening to me.